extending Brandon Aiyuk to a new contract. When we talk about
Yeah.
Deebo Samuel's interview on Kay Adams, I found him talking about Brandon Aiyuk to be the most hilarious part.
Yeah.
I absolutely loved how he was just like, yeah, I was just telling Brandon Aiyuk, he did everything he could do. He played as good as he can. Just gotta
Yep.
take a back seat, take it easy, let him and his agent and the 49ers work it out. I'm like, oh yeah, Deebo? Is that what he should is that
Yeah.
what he should do?
Yeah.
Well,
But Debo's learned from what he went through, and he's
exactly.
sharing that, and that's a good thing. Is that
Yeah.
Aiyuk needs to know how Parag negotiates these contracts. He lowballs shamelessly, and Deebo was taking it as that lowball is what you really think my worth is, and he got angry. He got upset because he
Yeah.
didn't know how Parag goes about the contract
Which
negotiations.
why didn't
And that's
he
always what he does. Every single player, he does the same thing.
I will say though, I think Deebo, like, he did know. Trent Williams went through this. I think who else was it? There was a couple of guys, but I know Trent Williams came out much like Deebo just did this offseason and said, hey, I'm in touch with, Deebo. I think Deebo went out to Texas to stay with Trent for a little bit during his contract negotiations.
Yeah.
So it is kind of funny, but I would hope. It does seem Aiyuk, not that I think Aiyuk has a healthy ego and wants to get paid and all these things, but
Sure.
he does seem a little bit maybe calmer than Deebo Samuel, so maybe he can receive the information a little better, where it feels like Deebo kind of needed to go through the process, have some
Right.
years to kind of get that wisdom. Aiyuk does kind
Yeah.
of
Well,
portray
Aiyuk
himself to
seems
be
to
more of
have
a
more
calm.
emotional maturity than Deebo, and
Yeah.
in the way that he carries himself and
That's
conducts.
a good way to say it.
Yeah. So I think that he knows, and it'll
Maybe
help to
no
hear from
clubs with
Deebo.
signs. Do you
Yeah.
remember that? There was like a sign and Deebo was in the club and I was like, no.
Yeah.
I was
Yeah.
thinking,
But
yeah.
I think that Aiyuk will hear from plenty of people that this is just how the Niners do business. Be prepared for that, and know that by the time it gets to the summer, then you'll start getting offers from Parag that are actually at your market value or close, and
Yeah.
then go from there. And so
Don't
for
freak
Aiyuk,
out
that's
about
the
offer
question.
one.
Right.
I'm a fan, and I think they're gonna offer him like 15 million.
Oh, sure. Yeah. If that.
They are
Yeah.
they like to start as low as possible. They're like, hey, buddy.
Right.
I know George Kittle was the other guy I was thinking about besides Trent Williams, who also
Oh,
went
sure. Yeah.
through this. And I'm talking about guys who are worthy of the check that they ended up getting, and they
Right.
still had to go through this ringer.
Yeah.
I am interested when we're talking about Deebo Samuel. Deebo is obviously coming off an all-pro season. In my opinion, should have been in the MVP conversation, one of the best players in the league conversation. Definitely for the 49ers, they could not have ran or made the run that they did without Deebo's production in 2021. Brandon Aiyuk, more so than having like one breakout year, has consistently been such a good wide receiver. Do you think that the 49ers are going to try to pay Brandon Aiyuk less than Deebo Samuel?
I
Or do
don't
you
think
think
they
that they're going to
can.
base
I
it off
think
of the
that
market?
they're going to try to calibrate it to Deebo and say that ultimately, when they finally get to real deals, they'll say, we'll offer you what we gave Deebo. And I don't think that Aiyuk will go for that, because he can point to things and say, Mike Evans just got 26 million per. Amon-Ra St. Brown getting 25. Justin Jefferson is in contract talks to get 30 or more. CeeDee Lamb might get 30. And so Aiyuk is going to say, look, one, you need to make me the number one option. And two, when you do that, my market value is going to be 27 to 28 million. And so the question then becomes, are the Niners willing to pay that? In the past, historically, they haven't. It's when Buckner said that, I want $4 million more than what you're willing to pay. They traded him for a first-round pick. Now, will they do the same thing with Aiyuk, or will they learn from that lesson that it was a mistake and that you're better off paying that extra $3 to $4 million to Aiyuk? And ultimately, I think that's what's going to happen, is that they realize how central Aiyuk is to the offense, not just as a receiver, but as the favorite target of Brock Purdy and as a critical part of their run game, that you need Brandon Aiyuk, and that he's going to be a central part of this team going forward. And I think that's worth the extra $3 to $4 million he's going to want.
I agree. And it's also worth it in the way, like, not only does his play, in my opinion, and the fact that he's kind of on an ascension, like when you're talking about
Right.
Mike Evans has, you know, probably a Hall of Fame career, but he's on the descending part of his career. Even when we think about Deebo Samuel in that breakout year, it kind of feels like he might not ever get to like that level again. Where when we look at Brandon Aiyuk, he can kind of have the mentality of like, you're paying me for what I can do, like not just what I've done, but like what I can do for you in the future, and what a tandem like me and a younger Brock Purdy can do when this aging roster starts to dwindle. Like, you can still have a foundation.
Yeah, we're still the core. And as Purdy improves, and if you invest in your offensive line, then you can throw more to Aiyuk further down the field, and that's a key part of the game for the offense. And so if Kyle transitions to that, as I think he should, then you look at
they all work together.
The projection of Aiyuk collectively on the offense is his value, 27 to 28. And I hope that the Niners reach that conclusion as well. Because the other problem is that if you then say, well, he wants too much, we're going to trade him. Can you really trade Brandon Aiyuk for a first-round pick when this might be a record year in terms of just how good this wide receiver class is? And they're saying that there's going to be 15 wide receivers taken in the first 2 rounds. It's loaded. And so if you're a team, are you going to want to pay Brandon Aiyuk $25 million, or are you going to want to draft a guy?
Yeah. Oh, I like that.
That's why I think
you have to trade a high. And hasn't that happened before? Like, when teams are trading for a player that they have to pay, you actually usually get less compensation back, because like they're about to pay this player.
Well, and especially when it's this good a class, is that this is being talked up as one of the best wide receiver classes in history. And so if you're Indianapolis and you're at 15, would you rather draft Brian Thomas from LSU, or would you rather trade for Brandon Aiyuk? You'd rather take Thomas, because you've got a young quarterback, you got a young team, and it's cheaper. You know, that makes more sense for them. So what can you really get back for Brandon Aiyuk given this draft class? I'm not sure you can get the mid-first round pick that they would be hoping for.
And also, what does it say about your organization? I feel like, maybe aside from the Buckner trade, and that, I mean, whenever they talk about Buckner, John Lynch seems to be very timid about that, and kind of say, you know, oh, that's not representative. That move is not representative of what we do. He often, I think in every press conference that a contract comes up, he, you know, is like, we really compensate our guys who work hard for us. What does it say? Like, Brandon Aiyuk is such a quintessential 49er. They put so much work into making him the blocker that he is, have the mentality that he has. Obviously, he's an excellent route runner, very fast, physical. When, you know, played his rookie year, then was in the doghouse, overcame that, you know, developed a connection with Kyle Shanahan, has a connection with the quarterback, has a connection with guys like, where, you know, this topic is a Deebo Samuel topic. I do think, how do you sell it to the other players and to players coming in that you're drafting?
Exactly right.
Like, work as hard as you can and play as hard as you can, because then, like, the reason that players want to do that is because they're going to be rewarded by your team. If you just get rid of guys like that, this would be the second, you know, I think the thing with Buckner is maybe they didn't draft him. I don't know, but
that could be part of it. But I hope that based on what Lynch has said,
that's still such a bad look.
Yeah, well, based on what Lynch has said, is that's not representative of who we are. And it's true that they have taken care of players and paid them market value and beyond. So I hope they do the same thing with Aiyuk, and we'll see if they learn. But you know, there's a lot of things that will factor in, but I think what you just said was great. It's exactly right. Here's a player that did everything the way you want it done, who worked really hard to elevate his game. He was in the doghouse. He did all the work. He did exactly what you want any player to do. How can you then turn around and say, nope, we're not going to give him the bag? You've got to reward that as part of your team culture. Is here's someone that did everything you wanted. You have to take care of him. Otherwise, there's a culture hit in the locker room of, why should I do all this when look what they did with Brandon Aiyuk? They traded him for a first-round pick. And that's part of why you have to keep him. But also, I think that part of it is that Aiyuk will take ownership of being the first option in the offense, and that he'll work even harder if you make that investment.
Yeah, like
he's proven he'll put in the effort. He'll be even more of a leader, and he'll do more in his role. And I think that you can see that based on who he is, what he is on the field, that you're going to get value. You're going to get that 27 to 28 million on the field and off. And that's part of why you need to pay the money to him.
I completely agree. And Jesus says it's a business, that's why. But my response to you, Jesus, would be it's good business to keep a guy like Brandon Aiyuk. It's bad business to be setting the precedent that how you get, large contracts on this team is by butting up to Kyle Shanahan. Because right now, if you look at Kyle Juszczyk, Deebo Samuel, we need to start telling the guys that you're drafting, the younger guys that you're free agents that you're bringing in, hey, the way to get rewarded on this team is by your play on the field and how you carry yourself in the locker room. I think this has been like the second or third training camp in a row that Brandon Aiyuk was touted as, the leader of the offense, a guy who was going 100% every single day, going against Fred Warner, doing all that. So
and he came into camp in the best shape of his life and elevating his game of having even more tools in the toolbox. And that's part of the business too, is that when you have an employee that's that good, that rises above and beyond, that does well beyond what's expected, you should take care of him. That's part of a business too. Now, I get the point that you can look at all these receivers in this draft and say, I want this guy, I want that guy. Yeah, but at what cost in terms of the entire team? You can focus in on replacing Aiyuk, but you need an offensive tackle. You need a defensive end. You need a lot of different positions. If you now take the tangent of saying we're going to address wide receiver, what does that do to the overall roster? The roster balance has to be part of the equation. You can't just look at the wide receiver and separate it out on an island and say, well, we'll just replace him with this. No, there's a domino effect for the entire team, the entire draft. You got to factor that in.
Completely agree. And the business of it is the business of NFL teams to not just give in to every player. I agree, which is why I would say they should they should hand Kyle Juszczyk a piece of paper that says, you're going to take a $5 million pay cut or we're going to cut you because we don't owe you anything. When it comes to Deebo Samuel next year, I think that they should look to move off of him. I just think that, Jesus, maybe you're looking, like, I agree with your philosophy, but I think you're looking at the wrong player for that. I think
what he's talking about, Jesus is right that you need to be cutthroat. Walsh was. He was famous for getting rid of a player a year too early rather than a year too late. And he proved that even with Joe Montana and Ronnie Lott. So he was willing to do it regardless. Kyle isn't. Kyle is friend of the players and has said as much. And I think that's part of the problem of why Kyle is the real GM can be a problem, because there are players that the Niners need to move on from. And I'm not sure if Kyle has the heart or the stomach to do it. And so we'll see. But, do they need to move on from Deebo? Yeah. Do they need to move on from Armstead? Yeah. But is Kyle capable of doing that? We'll see. To your point, Ashely, I think with Aiyuk, you've got to keep him because he's a central, foundational piece for the next 5 years if you keep him. And if he doesn't, now what? Yeah. You lose your best separator, your best route runner, Purdy's most trusted receiver, your best blocker as a receiver. You lose a lot.
Yeah, Deebo and Brandon Aiyuk also, just from like a health and being able to be on the field level, knock on so much wood, has, been much better about being able to stay on the field than a George Kittle, a Deebo Samuel, those guys. Obviously, Jennings is good, but he's not a wide receiver one. So I just think that, I think keeping Brandon Aiyuk is, in my opinion, the most important offseason move that they're going to make. And to me, it's not even a question. It's either are they going to extend him or are they going to make him play on his 5th-year deal?
But if they play games like that where they say that, well, we'll just we'll go on the 5th year and then we'll franchise tag you. what's the emotional investment of Brandon Aiyuk in getting better and being a leader and elevating his game and continuing to grow as a player? If you play those games with players, you burn them.
I completely agree. And obviously, I think Brandon Aiyuk would still want to play at the top of his level because he'd want to go somewhere else. But it would be, like you're saying, it would be giving up on a guy who is on the ascension part of his career when you know, obviously you want to compete for a Super Bowl. My dad, anytime you bring up Kyle Juszczyk, is so productive.
I didn't say Juice. I didn't say it.
I brought him up. I do think that, you know, talking about Kyle's friends, I think Juice is going to stay. But I'm wondering if what they'll actually end up doing is restructuring Deebo Samuel. And because I think when we're talking about this, Kyle Shanahan, whether or not we think that they should be moving on from certain people, Kyle Shanahan does have his favorites. So I think my dad is safe and Juszczyk is going to stay. I also think Deebo's probably going to stay. So maybe it would be better or more in the 49ers' best interest to restructure a guy like Deebo this year and be able to bring in, you know, sign their draft picks and bring in a big free agent.
Well, if they restructure Deebo, they save $15.8 million on this year's cap. It's a lot of money. And so I think that's part of why they would look at that. I'm sorry, what?
They can't cut Eric Armstead right now, right? Because it would be
they can if they wanted to, but
I mean, money-wise, it doesn't make sense.
No. And the same thing with Deebo is that the dead cap hit would be $21 million.
Do you think that there's anything? I remember this was like over a week ago now, but I think it was Mike Silver had an article where he was kind of alluding that there were going to be some moves. What are you anticipating if there is something like that? Like when I read that, I was thinking of Armstead or of Juice. Do you think that was kind of just speculation, or are you anticipating there to be?
Well, we'll find out, but we'll see if there's any big moves before the draft. But I think that he was speculating on. There are players that the Niners aren't necessarily as sold on as when they signed them. You know, and Deebo being one of them. But it's not viable for them to trade out of him. In terms of your dad and Juice, I think that Kyle is going to want that blocking. And so as long as they don't have two tight ends that are legitimate receiving threats that can block, until they have that, Juice stays because that's what Kyle wants in his offense. So I think you're okay on Juice. I think he's going to stay. It's going to take them a while to get to a tight end 2 set. But once they do, then Juice will be gone. I think that he'll be gone either next year or the year after. But this year he's safe because they don't have 2 tight ends yet.
I think next year, because John Lynch did talk about them drafting a tight end in this draft coming up this year. So I could see them, you know, kind of having a guy learn the system. I love you, Daddy, and I don't want to get into a huge Juice segment every single time, but Juice did not play for even 50% of the snaps last year. So I don't know how important he is to the offense if he's literally
he is to Kyle. Kyle needs Juice in terms of the way he sets up the scheme, and Juice is an important part of that. So I don't think there's any chance. Kyle is the real GM, and that means Juice is staying and Deebo is staying. People can say, yeah, but you need to move on from them contractually, and here's all the benefits. And yeah, you can make that argument, but it's not going to happen. No, Kyle has his favorites.